Dust Tracks on the Road by Zora Neale Hurston is my favorite. So, out of this book, I'm going to read a little bit from page 68 and 69 when they're talking about Zora's view and Langston's view on racism, basically, um, the black voice, so forth and so on. Moreover, it says here, the last paragraph of page 68. If you want to get your, okay, and read along. Moreover, what Zora's black critics failed to grasp was the reason behind Zora's lifelong practice of minimizing the resentment of African Americans in her work. It was a simple one, really. Quote, bitterness, as she put it in Dust Tracks on a Road. Quote, bitterness is the great graceless acknowledgement of defeat. Bitterness is the graceless acknowledgement of defeat. I love that quote. Zora recognized that those who are bitter and resentful are seen by themselves and others as victims, and the very existence of victims justifies, in a real way, the acts of the victimizers. If you are intent on oppressing a people, you want and expect them to be bitter and resentful. If instead they react with good humor and heroism, taking matters into their own hands and ignoring your oppressive acts, you feel frustrated that those acts have failed to crush your intended victims. And I don't intend to run until you run me. So why give off the smell of something dead under the house while I am still in there tussling with my sword in my hand? Whether fools or sages, tricksters or saints, villains or heroes, her characters, by refusing to be victims and by asserting their complete independence from the white world, attained a freedom that resentful and bitter characters of, say, Richard Wright, my favorite, one of my favorite writers of all time, Richard Wright, were forever unable to attain. Because I remember reading books about Richard Wright's view, like when Native Son. If you haven't read Native Son, I don't want to spoil it, but there was a particular part in there where Bigger kills a white woman. Okay? Bigger also kills a black woman. Okay? And there's some things in that book that, and I read that book 3 times, and I read it and because of the shock at first, I was like, oh, I need to read this again. There's some underlying stuff. I read it at several different ages, but I haven't read it in my 40s or 50s. I read that book when I was really young and young in the head, and I loved that book, and it kept calling me back because I wanted to continue to try to figure out why he wrote it in this way when I know in my life what black people are going through. He went through, obviously, must have seen worse, you know. So I remember painting this picture of a black man up against a brick wall. It's my brother's favorite painting of mine, and I don't have it anymore. It's in Florida with a poet, and that's the way I felt when I had to think, why would he? What was he writing that up against? And it was possibly because I'm not a black man, I'm a black woman, but up against the wall and how that suffocating feeling is. And if you have read Native Son and you're in that room with Bigger and the white girl, this suffocating feeling, this back up against the wall, this whatever your feelings are when you read that, it's pretty darn thick. All right. But anyway, so in saying this about Richard Wright, I choose to disagree and also agree because you don't know. None of us know. We can have opinions. We don't know. We don't know. There's always going to be critics, right? So whatever. Having grown up in an all-black town, Zora wanted to show the world that an autonomous black community, led and organized by black people, had no need for bitterness or resentment. They already lived in a kind of utopia. Zora took pains to explain her stance in a 1943 letter to County Cullen. Okay, if you haven't read any County Cullen, I read him years ago. It was a library checkout book about that thick years ago, way before I moved here to Texas. I was young, and I need to revisit my County Cullen reads. And I read County Cullen because my mother, and so forth and so on. Why don't I put something about lynching in my books? This is Zora. As if all the world did not know about Negroes being lynched. Okay? Okay. My stand is this. Either we must do something, and do is in italics. Either we must do, very active, must do something about it that the white man will understand and respect, or shut up. Okay? Just shut up. No whiner ever got any respect or relief. If some of us must die for human justice, then let us die. But my own self-respect refuses to let me go to the mourner's bench. Our position is like a man sitting on a tack and crying that it hurts, when all he needs to do is get up off it. I shall never join the crybabies, right? And that's her stance, right? And there's another line on here I highlighted. Besides, it was a lot more fun advancing than complaining. So that was Zora's stance. You can't, oops, I'm losing my place. You can't help but respect that, right? You can't help but respect that. But my issue with the back and forth of the comparisons to Richard Wright, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and where they were, and W.E.B. Du Bois, and um, uh, yeah, I can't think of the book, and I read it, and Booker T. Washington. It's just all of this, um, the people that we see, just like now, the popular people on um, the news, whether it be politicians or people who are critics of this person or that person, and just all the many podcasts that come up with this differing view and this differing view and so forth and so on. So we picked these writers back then in the day, okay? And you put this black person's voice against this black person's voice. Langston ain't black enough, but yet he's championing the black voice. Zora's living it in a different way than Langston, so she's championing it in her way. I ain't got to write about this, that, and the other, and and make my people victims and their stories like a Richard Wright or so forth and so on. But you got all these different black voices living their different black experiences, and whether they were up from slavery or not a slave, but writing about somebody else who was a slave and his standpoint. How are you going to attack somebody else's position when you ain't lived in their shoes? And it's the putting against of all these different black voices that I can't stand, because they have their experience and their truth, and all lends to the beautiful lives that we have led and the things that we have overcome. And they're all so needed, so desperately needed. And just because we are needing those voices doesn't mean we have to side with one over the other. Just choose your lane, and if that's your lane, doesn't mean the other person's lane was less paved. That's that on that. That's my thoughts right now.